allow me to tell you a story."
"What kind of story, Grandpa?"
the little one chirped, ever so eager amidst the softness of their bed cushions. "A fairy tale, little one, as tall as your father, and as utterly unbelievable as your mother, yet, like their love for one another, undeniably true." The elder spoke, his voice a soothing song with hints of mystery and the reminiscence of time. "A tale of a great goddess, Gaia, Mother Earth." Thoroughly entranced by her elder's words, the little one pulled the blankets up and over her, her eyes wide open as she plied the depths of the elder's own gaze. He began, "There was once a fairy, a young little one just like you, and her name was Freya. Young Freya adored animals. She loved the poof of a puppy's hair. She adored the swish of a kitten's tail. She always got a good chuckle from the eloquence of a pig's snort." The little one laughed at this, imagining the silly little oinks of a tiny piglet, as the elder continued. "But of all animals, the ones she adored the most were birds. She loved the songs they could sing. She loved the beauty of their feathers as they shined in the sunlight, and above all, she envied their wings." The little one interrupts.
"Did she not have wings, Grandpa? But she's a fairy."
He nodded sagely. "Indeed she was, but alas, she was born without, unlike so many of her sisters. She could not fly, and would never know the kiss of the breeze upon her cheeks. They did not wait for her as they took for the fairy kingdom above the clouds. They simply left her behind." The little one's expression darkened slightly as she asked, worried,
"Isn't that lonely?"
But the elder shook his head. "No, for her mother, Gaia, remained with her. She could not bear to leave her daughter behind."
"But what about her father?"
The little one yet again interrupted. "There are no men amongst the fairies. Now hush, child, and let me tell you of Gaia and her children," the elder continued. But the little one's perceptive thoughts could not be so easily quelled.
"Children? There were others?"
Ah, children, always so quick to ignore the words of their elders. But it is this curiosity which warms the elder's heart so, for it is they who most appreciate his stories. He nods once again. "Yes, indeed. The animals. Gaia knew that her daughter would be lonely, and so she spoke with the flowers and the trees. She asked of them to make friends for Freya, so that she might never be truly lonely, and all the shrubs and the lichens asked for in return was but a drop of Gaia's blood. With it they made the animals, the dogs and the kittens, and the pigs and the birds, and all else besides and between. This land, once home only to grasses and greenery, became a vibrant place of plenty and abundance, where Freya and her mother could live and frolic for all their days amongst their furry, fluffy, feathery, and pudgy friends." As the elder says pudgy, he gently pokes the little one's cheek in a light tease, and being quite ticklish, she can't help but laugh. "But," he continued, "it was not enough for young Freya, for as adorable as animals may be, they aren't very good at holding conversation. And her mother and the plants were quite boring to the young and energetic Freya. Always so slow to think and respond, always telling the same stories."
"Like you, Grandpa."
The little one pokes innocently. It's the innocent jabs that hurt most. But he laughs it off. "I like to think that my stories are more interesting than a tree's. But yes, they were old, quite old, and had seen much, quite much. The stories they had to tell were so often vague and unappealing to a child of Freya's age. She craved for someone to speak with earnestly, someone her age who could understand her desires in a way that not even her mother could."
"So what?"
the little one began, but was hushed by a gently crooked finger. "Hush, child, and listen well," the elder continued. "She did nothing, for she was young and knew little. But one day, as her bright red hair flickered in the wind amidst a field of azaleas, she saw something she had never seen before."
A new animal?
The little one asked, confused. "A boy, the first other person Freya had ever seen. Not like her mother, certainly not like the other fairies who had left for the place above the clouds, but similar in many ways. No fur or claws or feathers. His hair was blonde but dirty and dull, unlike Freya's bright crimson threads. But his blue eyes were piercing, a gaze she could not help but meet, and when she did, he turned to run. But she called to him, 'Wait!' and he waited, turning slowly like you do when your mother calls for you after you've done something wrong." The little one was entranced now, unable, or perhaps unwilling, to interrupt her elder's story. He smiled, knowing now that she was truly hooked. "What? Who are you?" she asked. "I'm Adam," he replied tentatively, his eyes shifting to the azaleas as if he were guilty of something. But Freya did not notice, for she'd never done anything wrong and did not know the look. "Hi, Adam, I'm Freya. Do you want to play? The flowers are very fun to dance in," she excitedly offers. No, I can't. I have to go," he refused hastily, turning to try and run away. But she replies and approaches, and he freezes, seemingly out of fear. "Why not? It's very fun. You won't regret it. I'm sure of it." She pushes, desperate now to finally have a friend with whom she can speak. My mother says it's dangerous here, that a witch lives here and that she'll eat me if I get too close," he stammers, panic creeping at the edges of his voice. But Freya simply laughs and smiles, the most innocent and disarming of smiles, the kind that only a child can offer. "Silly, there's no witch here, just me and my mother, and I've never been in danger. It's safe here," she assures him, stretching out a hand, and he simply cannot resist. For he too was quite lonely, an only child with no siblings, living in a remote cabin far from any town or village. Freya was the first other child he had ever seen, and she was right. The azaleas did look quite fun to run around in. And so, with a silent nod, he took her soft, gentle hand and joined her amidst the flowers. They danced, though he was a terrible dancer. They sang, though he was a terrible singer. And they ran, and in this, at least, he could keep up. But Freya did not mind that he was bad at playing, only that he played and that they played together. They spun and jumped and shouted with joy and glee all day until the sun overhead fell just beneath the horizon. The boy realizes his mistake and says to Freya, "Oh no, I've stayed out too late. I have to run home before it gets too dark." Freya understands this, as her own mother also makes her return home before night, and the two bid farewell, promising, of course, to play again tomorrow. But tomorrow he did not come. Freya waited and waited and waited, but once again she was left alone. She cried and cried, for her friend had abandoned her, just like the other fairies. Was it something she said? Was it because she did not have wings? But he didn't have them either. She did not know, and she cried for it. Then darkness clouded her vision, as she fell asleep amongst the flowers, despite not being tired. The little one gasps.
What happened to her?
"Tisk, tisk, little one, all in due time. Remember, this is a story about Gaia. But to tell you of her, it is important to know of her daughter, for Freya was the world to Gaia, her everything. How she would have loved to watch over her at all times, but she had her gardens to tend to. She had to make sure the animals were fed and the plants happy. She trusted that her daughter would do as she says, and never go beyond the azalea field. Now, where was I? Ah, yes. Gaia was worried. It was night, and Freya had not returned. She asked the animals and the trees to help find her, but they turned up empty-handed. She was nowhere in the sanctuary. But just then, one of the little birds that Freya so favored returned exhausted and said that she saw Freya fall strangely asleep in the azalea field after a very odd-looking bee stung her in the neck. After that, great big people took her, and the bird followed them down the mountain. She saw a little boy with them, who looked quite guilty. The bird knew of it, for it had flown down the mountain many times to observe the strange folk in the valley below. It overheard their conversation, but it did not know their language, for it did not possess Freya's or Gaia's gift for understanding all living things. It watched them poke Freya with strange things, drawing a bright red substance from her. The bird did not know what it was they wanted with Freya, but once they'd put her in a cage and on a great metal beast, it knew it had to fly back to warn Gaia. Gaia was furious. She had made clear to the people of the valley that they were never to go up the mountain, and now they had broken that promise. She cared not why, for now her daughter was in grave danger. So she took the form of a great majestic bird of prey and flew down the mountain. The flap of her wings forced the villagers to grab hold of objects and each other, and she cried in rage, "Where is my daughter?" The eldest of the village appeared before her, struggling to stand amidst the storm of her fury, and explained the young son of a hunter had gone up the mountain against his father's orders and encountered the poor girl. The next day he made the mistake of mentioning her in passing to a villager while strange men were in town. They'd overheard him and forced him to show them where, and he did, unable to resist their fearful might. It was not the villagers' fault, but those evil men from beyond the mountains in their beasts of steel. They were intrigued by her strange abilities and her crimson blood, so they took her away to study her elsewhere. Gaia's fury did not abate, instead only worsening, but she was not callous. She knew it was not truly the fault of the villagers, nor even that young boy. She knew well the recklessness of children. Instead, she took to the skies, leading a great army of beasts, calling the very land itself to her aid. They flew for days and nights in the direction of the fuming pillars of smoke and ash that belched from the towers of the metal city, but they could never match the speed of a metal beast, unceasing and tireless. By the time they arrived, it was too late. She scoured the city, laying low the vile men who would stop her, but Freya was nowhere to be found. She and her beasts eventually destroyed the entire city, sparing only the innocents who had nothing to do with her daughter's kidnapping. It was from one of them that she learned that Freya had been taken further still, to the largest of their cities, from which rose a grand spire. A spire that reached to the place above the clouds and could deliver people below to the heavens, if they had a sufficient offering to make to its brass gods. She paled and made haste. For many more days and sleepless nights she hurried, but when she'd arrived at the grand spire, it was too late. She watched, horrified, as her daughter was taken beyond her reach, to a place Gaia was long forbidden to tread. But that was when she had an idea. For the first time in many, many years, cruelty had made its way into Gaia's heart. She wept in rage and sorrow. Her tears became the rain, and the rain became a flood. The flood wiped away the lowlands and all who lived within. Her rage cast upon the spire a storm that rocked its very foundation. She knew it could not bring her daughter back to her. but at least it could stop it from taking anything else ever again. She destroyed the spire and the brass gods within, and bid the trees and the grasses and the shrubs to retake the lands. She gave to the beasts her anger, and from it they sprouted claws and fangs most vicious and cruel, to match the cruelty of the vile men who once dominated the landscape, but no longer. Gaia and her children reclaimed the earth, casting low the vile men and erasing them forever. But this did not free her of grief. She knew that her daughter was elsewhere, beyond her reach, and in the hands of even viler sorts who would use her for their own gain. She cried more, wailing in sorrow for days. Days became weeks, weeks became months, months became years, and still she cried. The world became one of water, with little land left to support the animals, now without their caretaker, who had receded into the earth to mourn her loss. They used her final gifts to them to survive, for they had no choice, and so the land became twisted, a place of grief and sorrow, where life cannot flourish without death.
Grandpa, I don't like this story.
The little one began to wail. Hush, little one, it's all right, it's just a story, and not all stories are happy. Remember that, it's important. The elder reassured her. It is better to learn the harshest lessons in a safe place. Unknown to Gaia, her cries were heard. Freya was her blood, and she could feel her mother's sorrow no matter the distance. But this did not stop the vile men. They believed her blood was a miracle, an elixir of life that could turn any land into one of abundance. So they took her blood and fed it to many places, rejoicing in their success, even as poor Freya could no longer bear the pain. But they knew not the power of a mother's grief, and they would be punished so. For it is their greed that took Gaia's daughter from her, a sin that cannot be forgiven. Any world Freya's blood touched grew with abundance, and grew and grew and grew, far more than the vile men could ever hope to control. The plants and the beasts grew to frightening proportions, and were always hostile. By the time the first place had grown beyond their control, they had already tainted thousands of lands with the blood of Gaia's innocent daughter. The vile men had nowhere left to go, and were forced to live only in those few places that remained, where life was simple and scarce, places where Gaia's cry could not be heard. In time, they had forgotten about Gaia and her sorrows. They no longer knew why the places where her cries were heard were so dangerous, so hostile, preferring instead to simply call them Deathworlds and avoid them. They continued in their blind ignorance of their own misdeeds. And so Gaia, mother of Earth, became the mother of Death and all its worlds.
But Grandpa!
The little one cried, desperate perhaps to reassure herself that the story is just that.
We live on Earth, and it's not dangerous here.
But the elder smiled. Ah, little one, but that is because we are not vile men. Remember, Freya's blood was crimson, as is ours. For we too are children of Gaia, born of her blood just like all the other animals. And while we too are embroiled in the natural cycle, we are not foreign to ourselves. Unlike the others, we may tread upon the places where Freya's blood was spilt, provided we do so with reverence and respect for the ones already there, lest we incur the mother's wrath. We are all Gaia's children, and we must play nice when possible. Now get to sleep, little one. You have a big day tomorrow. She simply nods, turning to the side and pulling the blanket over herself until naught but her crimson hair could be seen. Her ruby eyes were concealed now behind tired eyelids. The elder stood, shakily, and walked out of the room. He closed the door gently and stood a moment in the hallway, a long, pale white corridor, unbedecked by anything save the text marking the child's door. Freya, 02. A man in a white coat approaches the elder. "How is the subject's condition?" he asks with a clinical, apathetic tone. "The subject has a name, you know," the elder retorted. "I am fully aware, but frankly, Director Smith, given the nature of our work," the scientist began. "I, too, am aware, Dr. Claude. Nevertheless, she is a child. We are adults, and we have responsibilities to the next generation, artificial or otherwise. And besides, I think this one is quite promising. It is worth it to treat her with respect," Director Greaves intoned seriously. Dr. Claude sighed. "As you wish, Director. Now, I have a report on the status of the Gaia project." "Proceed, Doctor," Greaves sighed himself. "As expected, the unique sequences discovered in the subject, Freya's blood do seem to have bioaccelerant properties. They present more strongly than those of the original sample, and are capable of causing incredible amounts of plant growth and tissue repair in animal cells. It has been demonstrated to be capable of curing cancer, and even reversing biological age to a relatively prime state," Claude reported coldly. "Any side effects?" Director Greaves inquired. "None that we've observed so far, but it will take time to be certain," the doctor responded. "There will be. So far, nothing is beyond my expectations. Did you come here to tell me what I already know, Doctor?" the director asked, mildly agitated. "No, Director. There was one interesting detail to report. One of the researchers working on the samples drawn from Freya performed an unauthorized experiment on themselves after discovering the age-reversing properties. However, shockingly, there was no rejection of the blood transfusion. What we thought to be an exclusively amorphic blood type was, in fact, polymorphic. The cells somehow changed to match their environment. She is a universal donor, sir. Assuming there are no side effects, we could, in theory, make all of humanity biologically—" The doctor got somewhat excited, hastening his speech as he delivered the report. "No, Doctor. As I said, there will be side effects. Detain the researcher. Maximum security. Make sure it's strong enough to hold even a Trexian wombat. We can't be too careful," Director Greaves commanded. "But, Director, how can you be so—" Dr. Claude exclaimed, but Greaves raised a hand to silence him. "History, Doctor. Learn it or repeat it. Or did you not read the data banks which accompanied the original sample?" The doctor was stunned into silence. He had read the data banks, but given the way they were written and the rough translation that the learning algorithm was only barely able to manage, he assumed it was mostly false, or at least misunderstood or exaggerated. But it seems Director Greaves was taking it almost literally. Very well, Director Greaves, as you say." Dr. Claude offers a short, respectful bow before turning and opening his comlink to give the order. "Dr. Michaels won't be happy at all, but he can save surprising his wife with his young face for after he's been quarantined." Director Greaves walked alone back to his office. He stood alone at the viewport, gazing out across the void to Earth below. He hated having to lie to the child, but it was for the best. She was not ready. He recalled memories, ancient ones from his own days as a child. He remembered, though somewhat unwillingly, the most painful day of his life. He did all he could, but what was a young boy to do? He remembered his parents' screams as they were torn apart. He remembered the tears running down his face as he hid in the closet. He remembered the "Booey, booey, booey," the station alarm. An intruder? No, the only way the alarm could skip yellow and go straight to red was if a threat simply appeared in the middle of the station. It could be some kind of Black Ops group, but Director Greaves had a better idea. Damnable eccentric researchers. Why did the best and brightest also have to be the stupidest? He pulled up a security feed on the viewport, overwriting the view to space. Exactly as he feared. Dr. Michaels suffered the side effects much more quickly than the test animals, likely due to an increased dosage, damnable fool. His body twisted and bones snapped. His feet extended into digitigrade, and his face broke and contorted.
Wolf type,
Director Greaves surmised. It took hours before the beast could be contained, but no injury dealt to it was effective, at least none caused by conventional weapons. What eventually allowed them to contain it was simply the side effects beginning to wear off naturally, his body slowly reverting to its original state, if significantly bulkier and slightly animalistic. Director Greaves sighed. It is thanks only to his own paranoia in designing the station's internal security systems that there were no deaths. However, even then several on the security team were injured, and one of the other researchers would be spending the rest of his life with a prosthetic left hand. He returned to his reminiscence, but was interrupted by Dr. Claude, the chief of security, and several guards barging into his office unannounced. "Director Greaves, give me one good reason not to arrest you immediately," Security Chief Byron demanded.
"Because, Reginald,"
Director Greaves began. "Don't call me that. It's Reggie to my friends, and right now you are not my friend, so it's Security Chief Byron," Reginald growled. Greaves sighed.
"Very well, Security Chief Byron. You won't arrest me because, for one, I am the sole owner of this entire station, and the one responsible for the paycheck of every single individual aboard it. For two, everyone aboard signed a waiver acknowledging the danger of their employment and the guarantee of benefits, including all forms of insurance, even those not strictly related to the work. For three, I am the only person who knows what it is we are dealing with, and you want me to be cooperative."
"Not telling us that this stuff makes goddamned werewolves isn't exactly what I'd call cooperative, Director. You should have warned us," Byron pressed. But Director Greaves snapped back.
"And I did, Security Chief. I warned everyone that the samples were dangerous. I explicitly ordered everyone to do nothing with them that was not thoroughly approved and, if possible, tested. And yet, Dr. Michaels broke that order and performed an unauthorized experiment. And now look what's happened. Do you think if I told people that this child's blood could turn you into an immortal werewolf, people in the STEM fields would be less inclined to inject it into their damned bloodstream? If so, you seriously need to use the internet more. Ignorance was the best policy, or so I thought. I should have been more thorough in my examinations of the personnel. But I underestimated the capabilities of my forensics team. Had I known that Dr. Michaels was a reckless bastard, I would never have accepted Claude's recommendation."
Claude spoke up. "With all due respect, Director, Dr. Michaels is outstanding in his field."
"Enough, Doctor! He was outstanding. Now he is an animal. He will not be the same man you knew. He may have his memories. He may have a similar personality. But the thing in that chamber is, and will always be, a beast. There is no controlling that rage. It will overtake him, seemingly at random, and it will get people killed. The only reason I haven't ordered his execution is because he, unfortunately, represents a unique scientific opportunity that I pray will never come again."
Director Greaves intoned gravely. You cannot mean to. He is a man, Director. He has rights," Dr. Claude exclaimed.
"And Freya is a little girl, but you had no issues whatsoever referring to her as a subject,"
Director Greaves spat back.
"And she is significantly less likely to rip out your throat because she didn't like the way your foot was pointing. And besides, he isn't a man. Not any more. As I said, What dwells within the body that was once Dr. Michael's is nothing more than a beast pretending to be sane."
Security Chief Byron spoke. "You say this as if you've seen this before, as if you have first-hand experience. Director Greaves, either you tell me what the hell is going on, or we will leave this room with you in cuffs." The old man sighs, turning back to the viewport, which once again shows the orbital view of Earth.
"Adam,"
Director Greaves says softly. "What?" Byron asks. Director Adam Greaves continues.
"My first name is Adam. You may call me that from now on. You are right. I have seen this before. All of it. But the circumstances are different, and I was a child at the time. It's convenient, actually. I just got done telling the girl a story, one that happens to be quite relevant."
"Be less vague, please," the security chief only half aggressively requests. Adam sighs.
"This is why I prefer children. They're far more willing to listen to my stories. Very well, I'll make it short and boring. I am older than I look, and yes, I know I look quite old indeed. The reason is simple."
He pressed a button on his cane, which suddenly transformed into a 2-foot blade, and with a movement so swift and clean that even the security chief could not follow it, he cut his own arm slightly. Green blood poured from the wound.
"I am not human. Before you ask, no, you can't have known. You won't find any records of my DNA because they don't exist. I know I look very similar, and there is a good reason for that. But at the cellular level, I am a different species entirely. One that is far, far longer lived than humans. Though even I have an expiration date, one which is unfortunately close. Though thankfully, my task is almost complete," he explains.
"Task, Director? What do you mean? And no riddles, please," Byron asks.
Greaves continues. "Gaia, Mother Earth, literally. I have met her. Rather, she met me. When I was a young boy, I happened upon her daughter. I was a reckless child ignoring my father's warning, and by pure chance I encountered something I should not have. But being a child, I could not say no to her requests to play. When I'd gone down the mountain, my parents were none the wiser. But being the fool of a child I was, I let slip in town barely a day later where I had been, which was when men of a different species took notice. Aliens, Byron, for lack of a better word. Humanity was not the first sentient species on Earth. Rather, it was my people. And we were enslaved to a yet more enlightened race from beyond the stars. Their rulership was loose. As long as we paid our tithes, they let us be. But occasionally they would send explorer units to find and identify unique assets to exploit. One of them happened to be in town when I mentioned the witch's daughter."
He returns the cane to its original state, though Dr. Claude, somewhat pale from the shock of learning just how prepared Director Greaves is, cannot take his eyes off it, even as Adam Greaves continues his story.
"You can imagine what happened next. By force they made me show them. By force they took her. By force none within the village could resist despite knowing that it would bring the wrath of the witch. Those aliens, whose names I do not even recall, left with her after drawing her blood. Crimson red, just like all of yours, and very much unlike anything else that was known to exist at the time. Its unique properties were discovered when a drop fell from the tip of the syringe and landed on the dirt, whereupon an azalea flower sprung up almost immediately."
His expression darkened.
"They took her. Violently, they started killing everyone in town to make sure everyone would keep quiet about their discovery of the century. My parents were with me, and they shoved me into a closet to protect me. I watched as they were brutally murdered by the claws of brass battle droids. By the time they had left, I and a handful of others were the only survivors. I suppose you could say it was lucky for us that they were so inefficient in their brutality. Or perhaps they were simply blinded by the haste of their greed.
His head turns upwards, preventing tears that did not exist from falling down his cheeks.
And then the witch came down the mountain. By means we did not understand, she had turned into a giant bird of prey, and she menaced us in her fury. The oldest surviving of our number stood and explained what had happened. I expected to be torn to shreds for my mistake, but she was surprisingly understanding. She was not like our overlords. She was kind and compassionate. It was clear she did not want to direct her rage at any that did not deserve it. If only that could have held true despite what happened next.
Next, Doctor, I'm struggling to accept that you're a literal ancient alien, but what is the point of all this? How does this explain what happened here? Enough with your long-winded tall tales. Byron was getting impatient.
Patience, Security Chief. It is a virtue, and context, I feel, is important. She pursued the aliens to their city and obliterated it. Sparing most of the people there, I and the others of my village knew only the devastation she left behind, and the stories of those who survived, which included one of them telling her where her daughter was taken to. The spire, though you would know it as a space elevator, was built atop what is today Mount Everest. In fact, if anyone bothered to dig deep enough into the thing, they'd likely find the brass alloys that once made up its foundation. In any case, she still followed. I know what happens only because Gaia herself told me after the fact,
Adam continued. Gaia again. Who is she? Byron asks. Finally, he is asking the right questions.
The witch, Mother Earth, the one that made the planet the 70% water and life-abundant place it is today. Her daughter was stolen from her, and she was not allowed to go to space. In her fury, she destroyed the elevator and sent the entire planet into an ecological apocalypse. This would come to be known by human scientists as the thing that killed the dinosaurs, which my people knew was the great kings of the plains. Though I don't know how they concluded that water existed in such vast quantities beforehand. It certainly did not. It was Gaia that brought most of it. Her sorrow in the wake of her destructive rage literally manifested as rains of salty tears, which created the salty oceans. Yet even in her madness, she did not forget about me and the villagers or the city she had destroyed. She came to us with gifts. Her blood, a twisted sort of gift it was. For any who drank of the blood she offered transformed much like Dr. Michael's, becoming part man, part beast. Some more so or less so than most, but ultimately all driven insane, except for me. I did not take her gift. I felt that I did not deserve a gift, not that I knew what it would do to me until after I had rejected it. Somehow she knew that I was the one who had befriended her daughter. So she spared me, out of kindness, and blessed me with protection from the hell that followed on the condition that I find her daughter. Unlike her, I was not bound to the land, although I had no way off the rock with the spire destroyed. I've spent millions of years watching this planet turn into the death world it is today, watching the beastmen slowly become the various animals that replaced the dinosaurs, with some of them even reverting into a form I found familiar, a form I could guide subtly from the shadows. Steadily, I gave humanity the tools they would need to reach space, though it was touch and go at times. Once here in the void, I learned exactly what Gaia had wrought upon my once overlords, confirmed by the old data we recovered with the original sample. They were blinded by greed, much like Dr. Michaels. They used Freya's blood to terraform entire worlds, but were too hasty. They did not wait to see the side effects and ended up dooming themselves. Nearly every planet, including most that they had long colonized and were retroactively terraforming, had suddenly begun growing out of control, becoming Deathworlds, all of them eerily similar to Earth. All that was left was a handful of minor planets with thin and simplistic biospheres, only barely capable of supporting larger life forms. Their galactic empire collapsed, and most of them fell back to the Stone or Industrial Ages. But millions of years is a long time. None of the species on the Council today truly remember their shared origins, nor why Deathworlds are so uniquely hostile to them and not to us, or, well, humanity. The only thing that shielded humanity from the exploitation of the more advanced races was the fact that they could never hope to colonize Deathworlds like Earth.
Director Greaves paused a moment, perhaps to collect his thoughts, which Byron took as a moment to interject. Okay, without questioning the sanity of all this, Director, what then is the point? If this stuff can't be safely used, why bother with it? He asked confoundedly.
My task, Reggie, remember? I must find her daughter and bring her back. Naturally, she's long dead. The ancient empire did not care for her safety when drawing her blood and killed her. That one sample is all that remained, and it is a testament to its power that it remained stunningly intact. Freya 02 is a clone made from that blood. It may not technically be her daughter, but it's the next best thing. Besides, perhaps whatever powers give Gaia her strength will somehow bring Freya herself back. In any case, it is the only way I can atone for my mistake and possibly give anything in return to Gaia. Once Freya is ready, I will take her to Earth myself. Gaia will notice.
Greaves says, as if any of this makes even a single iota of scientific sense. Well over half of everything he's said is akin to magic. How does someone cause entire planets to spontaneously turn into Deathworlds without even being there? How does she transform into animals or transform others? How would any of this even remotely work? Yet Greaves has green blood. He knew what would happen to Michaels. He knew what the samples would do even before the experiments started. It's disturbing how willing Byron is to accept all this, but Claude cannot. The child is the discovery of the millennia. The benefits she could bring to humanity are impossible to quantify. If Director Greaves truly isn't human, who is to say that he's telling the truth about any of this? How can we trust that he isn't one of those alien overlords trying to somehow get vengeance? His inaction has already led to a man being turned into a monster. And now he proposes that man be used as a test subject. He even said he'd execute him if not for that. Claude must do something, and it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. Dr. Claude drew a concealed weapon he brought with him just in case the director had resisted arrest and he needed a way to defend himself. He can use recordings of the conversation in the director's blood as proof that he was lying to everyone and clearly did not have humanity's best interest at heart. None in the room expected it, and the shot was clean. Adam Greaves fell to the floor as green blood oozed from the bullet wound.
You are a fool.
The final words of Adam, as a small green sprout emerged from his corpse, from which sprouted a single bright red azalea.